Yeah. Oh, okay. Here we go.
We're live.
We're live. So this is Chris Teal, and I have with me. Would you gentlemen mind introducing yourselves, please?
I'm Nick Finzer. Hello.
There's Nick.
And I'm Chris Ziemba. How's it going?
Very well. It's good to see you, gentlemen. And we may have some folks joining us as well, but this is a little bit of an informal question and answer and sharing session about our new course that we have finally launched, birthed out into the world. This Creative Jazz Fundamentals course for beginning improvisers. And this course is sort of a culmination of a lot of the work that we've all done as a group with the Institute for Creative Music through teaching workshops and camps and private students throughout the country, and I guess throughout the world to a certain degree. We don't really turn off our IfCM teaching brains when we're teaching in other areas or other camps. So this course is a bit of a culmination of what we've been working on over the last 5 years or so. And so I'll just give a little bit of background on the IfCM, and Nick and Chris, feel free to jump in at any time. And then I think that we're gonna talk a little bit about our individual experiences as beginning improvisers, as well as our experiences teaching beginning improvisers. And then we'll go over, talk about the course, show off a little bit of how it's put together and why it's maybe different than other courses or materials that are out there. And yeah, hopefully we will answer some questions from the people out in the world as well. So the Institute for Creative Music is a 501c3 not-for-profit that Nick and I started back in 2011. Is that right? It seems like it's right. 5 years. And what our focus is on working with students of all ages. We present interactive, fun workshops and performances that are centered around using jazz and creative music as a vehicle for improvisation, learning, style that's within these different types of idioms, and just trying to make it as interactive and fun and fear-free. Because I think that's something that was the reason for us teaching, this Creative Jazz Fundamentals course in this way, but also our in-person workshops, is that there seem to be a lot of kind of mystical nature surrounding jazz and in the way that it's taught a lot of times, as far as it's like, okay, these really, really high level players, they're up here, and it's kind of hard to connect, what they're doing and how they got there to beginners. And so we felt like there was this big gap that existed, even when we were finishing up our, undergraduate and jazz degrees in jazz performance. The way that people presented jazz, and it wasn't as relatable, kind of connecting those professional level players. They're doing all this stuff that's really amazing, and stuff that we still aspire to, even as we're out in the world playing as professionals. But there was a big disconnect between that and, like, okay, how do you get there? How do you relate that information to other people? How do we make sure that jazz and creative music isn't just something that is for the select few? Because we want to. It's a living music. It's not something that we want to disconnect from the people, and just giving everybody an entry point to that. So I don't know, anything as far as, like, I don't know, that's sort of spur of the moment. Nick and Chris, anything that comes to mind as far as sort of like why we decided to put together this organization and teach in this way?
Well, yeah, I think we had a lot of experiences with seeing other musicians who, didn't necessarily always think about how they could convey the information in a clear way to someone who has no context for what it means to play improvised music. So I think it was a way for us to kind of, one, organize our thoughts, and two, communicate more clearly with the students that we're coming in contact with, to help people be able to understand it and feel like it's, a welcoming environment we're all creating together, not, like you said, not like this elitist kind of super complicated music.
Right.
Yeah, that welcoming environment thing I think is really key, especially because there's a lot of situations, even when I was coming up, where I felt as a student that I was an outsider. That and there's this like you said, the mystical thing that people knew how to do, and if you couldn't figure out how to do it, then something was wrong. So I think the fact that it's a very welcoming environment that we try to propagate is very helpful in a general sense. So.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess that actually, it seems like some of that vibe, and I don't know if it's necessarily true that like we really wanted to be like antithetical to certain experiences that we'd have, but maybe it was just kind of some of our personalities, and just because we'd all played together in groups before and had like a good musical relationship and personal relationship, that we wanted to bring other people into that, instead of I think that we've all encountered that sort of like lecture based performance, or something that's really heavily reliant on, like, you got to know a lot of theory, like you got to know what the music looks like before you can actually play anything. Like I remember something that stood out to me was working with another teacher with very big beginners, and he had spent a lot of time working with them on theory, and these are kids who had really never like heard jazz before, and kind of his reasoning didn't really have anything to do with connecting or hearing what the kids were capable of, but he was like, oh well, the kids they can't start off learning songs, and it was this and to us, because we've been teaching improvisation and style in the context of songs and repertoire for so long, to me that kind of is like, wait, why would he think that? But it's very common. I think that just there has to be this, you need to know what it looks like. You need to know the theory behind why all of the notes tie together, or why these scales work with these chords, before you can actually learn a song. And I think that was a bit of a reality check for me, thinking like, oh yeah, this is just where a lot of high level performers or even people who are in teaching environments are at. It's like that's kind of their experience. But again, it's kind of like there was a definite disconnect. And I talked with this teacher for a while afterwards, because my suspicion was like, that's probably not how they learned how to play jazz. It's like, I think that because to a certain degree, it's easier for us to put a chart in front of someone and say like, okay, well, you've been playing classical music for a while, you can decode what this notation means, or here's a lead sheet, here are these chord changes, here are these scales or patterns that work over it. You need to put the puzzle together, like these are the individual pieces to the puzzle, and you should just be able to decode it. Kind of taking for granted that as experienced performers, like we've heard all this for a while, and so we're kind of taking for granted that a lot of beginning students, or even intermediate students, haven't had that same experience of either just like playing in an informal setting, to get to the point where all of that notation or decoding makes meaningful sense. And so I think that like what we've been trying to do with our workshops, with our camps, is provide a little bit more of an entry point that sort of builds students up to being able to read meaningfully, or decode chord changes or things like that, because we're able to jump in and say, okay, well, we can all actually like learn this song, and we can learn it with proper style because we're listening to professionals play it in this way, and we're copying each other, and like here's some simple improvisational ideas that we can repeat after each other and give feedback, and so I think that was maybe something that we initially stumbled upon, but I think that we've done a pretty, like, I feel really happy with the results that we've been able to get from students, and myself as a student, being a drummer and somebody who improvises in kind of a non-fixed pitch melodic way, like going and working on improvising with my voice or on piano. I think that this sequence that we've dialed ourselves into has really been empowering for me as, you know, improvising in a different context too.
Yeah, totally.
So I don't know if we could all just sort of take a turn going around and talking about some of our experiences as beginning improvisers. Like if we hop back in the Wayback Machine, you know, what was that, those first moments like for us personally, as far as, you know, maybe we had started, you know, playing instrument in a you know, more classical fashion, or like what was it like for you guys starting to learn how to play jazz, and maybe what were some you know, boxes that you were able to check sort of as like those aha moments for you? I don't know, Chris, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. It's actually hard for me to jump back in the Wayback Machine. I have a hard time remembering a lot of my experiences, but I do know that obviously I was classically trained, so for many years that's all I did was, you know, written notation, and I didn't listen to jazz really at all until high school. When I got to high school, the pianist that they had in their jazz ensemble had just graduated, and they knew that I played piano, so the band director said, "We're going to put you in the jazz band. Here you go." I didn't know anything about chord changes, had never listened to it before, so you can imagine that you know, it's sink or swim situation. And for most of the first years, it was sinking right to the bottom, and I felt very discouraged just because of the pressures that I was putting on myself, because I'm coming from a classical background. You know, I know that I know what it's like to learn a piece properly, and it's trying to learn a jazz tune from chord changes went against all of my preconceived notions of how to work with music to that point. Now, the good thing was that the band director was a really, really wonderful band director in our district who placed a lot of emphasis on improvisation and learning things by ear, and every student has to write compositions. So he fostered this really great creative environment. And so on the side, I would take lessons with him, some ear training lessons, you know, how to hear what these chords are, how to find minor sevens, major sevens, and some characteristic jazz sounds. So there was an element from the very beginning for me of using my ear first before really trying to jump to the theory and how this all works. But, you know, part of me was always screaming to figure out, well, okay, I like how it sounds, but how do I translate it to all these different situations? So then I went to a summer camp, the Skidmore Jazz Institute, which I ended up going to, I think, 3 times throughout my high school tenure.
Cool.
And there, I had some mixed experiences at Skidmore. I think there were a lot of great, I remember there being a lot of great communal times with other people in my combo where we learned things by ear. But then I also remember that there were these really intense theory sessions led by some teachers who I won't name that just kind of left everybody in the dust. And I remember not getting much out of that. But I don't know if that's really answering the question so far. But
yeah,
very slowly for me throughout high school, it started to change. And I think it was through a process of mostly listening. And I remember the very first time I ever did a transcription, it was just one chorus of, it was a blues, of course. I'm not blanking on what it was. But I remember really having this aha moment after I was able to use my ears to figure out some of this language, and that stuck with me more than almost anything else to that point had. So
nice. Yeah, that's great. And then at what point, I don't know, were you able to play kind of jazz like in an outside of school context, or when did it sort of change beyond like, okay, this is something I do in school, or this is something I do in camps, to like, oh, I can, you know, go and play, you know, either with my friends after school or start gigging, or like when did that sort of transition happen for you, Chris?
Yeah, well, that actually happened for me very early. And like I said, that first year in high school I was very closed, and that was mostly on me. But after that summer when I went to Skidmore, I went back to high school, and we had this, our lesson group was essentially a jazz quintet, which stayed together. We were all in the same grade, so we stayed together from freshman year until senior year. And so even by the second year, even by sophomore year, Oh, I should also add that our orchestra director was a great jazz bass player on the Buffalo scene. So he would kind of run our jazz quintet lessons. And so from sophomore year on, we'd be finding ways to creatively skip class, saying that we had a lesson just to go down and, work on some tunes. And then we'd get together and we'd jam at our houses on occasion. And I remember we had our first gig at a country club. I think it must have also been sophomore year, and it was snowing really hard, and there were 7 of us piled in a little SUV with the keyboard and the drums. And
Oh yeah,
the bass player's mom didn't want to pick him up after the gig,
he's still there.
Anyway, yeah, right. So, I don't know. I think from a very early on, it's just about instilling the confidence, because that's what was lacking in me from the very first part. It's not that I couldn't do it; it's just that I didn't believe that I could do it based on coming from a classical perspective. And it took a lot of different reworkings, trusting the ears, all sorts of stuff, before I was able to feel comfortable enough to do it outside of the classroom.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that just sort of having to get the initial experience, to even be able to build some sort of that confidence is tricky for a lot of us, because it does take just somebody taking charge and saying like, okay, come over to my house. Let's, I got a piano here, I got a drum set. Let's jam on this little idea that I've been creating, or let's take one of the big band tunes you've been working on in jazz band, and what would it sound like if we put it in a small group context, or like or those sort of necessities. I definitely remember myself and some of my friends being thrown into the situation where like our parents knew that we played together, and they're like, oh well, we have this birthday party coming up, and we don't want to hire like a professional band, so we'll have all the kids get together and they can just jam for a while. And so it was sort of out of necessity, back when people were like, oh yeah, we should just have like a live band there. So that was cool. So Nick, yeah, what about your initial experiences with jazz and improvising, and what was that like for you?
Yeah, I think my experience is a little bit different than Ziemba's, but when I was thinking about this, I realized that I actually remember the very first solo that I ever had to take was in 7th grade, and we were playing a really classic tune in the jazz repertoire, Louie Louie.
Fantastic.
And a friend of mine and I, we were challenging each other to actually come up with a solo. So we didn't necessarily improvise it on the spot, but we each like wrote out like 4 measures of a solo, and kind of like, I remember I could sing it to you right now. I still remember the solo, and I didn't even know. I'm not going to do it right now. It wasn't very good. But so that was like the first, and it had nothing to do with the song, but it was just like the first experience where I was like, oh, we can make stuff up and it's really fun. And then kind of in my, where I went to school and everything, I was kind of more focused on classical music, and I was also taking voice lessons and stuff. But so I kind of never knew what was going on with jazz. I just thought it was fun to just make stuff up. So there was that moment in 7th grade, and then there kind of wasn't too much going on until 10th grade. I started this big band at Eastman School of Music in Rochester. It was like a community thing. We played a bunch of Ellington music, and in those Ellington charts, there's a lot of, through the essentially Ellington, the charts have a lot of the solos transcribed and written out on them. And I remember looking at it and being like, what is that? That doesn't make any sense. Like, I don't understand what that is. But then when they would play the recording and being like, oh, like that's way easier to just listen to it than to like try to figure out what all these crazy little things mean. So that was the first time for me where I was like, oh, maybe this is actually harder than just like playing this thing, playing the music and listening to it and just kind of figuring it out. So that's when I started realizing like, oh, I don't need this music. I need to just go listen to this other thing, the original, and just figure out how to do it rather than worrying about like reading it or trying to learn these chord changes and stuff. And as far as like all of learning chords and scales and patterns and stuff, I really was really far behind when I got to college. I didn't know what anything meant. Like I never figured out, I didn't know what it meant to have a flat 9 or anything. I remember being a freshman at Eastman and sitting in jazz theory class and just being like, someone said sharp 11, and I was like, what is that? I don't know what that is. Because I never had like jazz lessons or anything. I had a few jazz lessons, but they never were about theory. It was always about like, play this thing like this other great person. Like, and so for me, it took like a while to kind of catch up all the theory stuff to just kind of copying what I was hearing. And so it kind of was for me, I guess it kind of just happenstance. But it wasn't through like my high school doing it. It was through this like kind of other extracurricular activities that kind of got me involved in that. And then actually, that same group that Chris Ziemba also played in, he probably doesn't know, but he really inspired me to begin writing tunes because he brought in this big band arrangement that he doesn't like of this tune. He will deny that he wrote, but I was really inspired by it. I was like, oh, maybe I could write songs too. So that was when I was in 11th grade, and right after that, my buddy and I started a band and wrote a whole bunch of tunes and stuff. So for me, it was all kind of just being inspired by being around, friends like Chris and pushing each other to try to do new things. And just like in 7th grade when my buddy was like, hey, we're going to write this 4-bar solo, and just kind of was always been that way for me. Kind of challenge my friends and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think. Oh, feedback. Some of my experiences are similar, but also kind of in a different track to what you guys mentioned. I think that a big part of me getting interested in jazz and there's all kinds of music that involves improvisation had to do with like I transferred around a lot of different schools when I was in like elementary through junior high and high school. Ended up at a really good high school music program where my dad was the choir director, and there was another great band director there at the same time. So I came in like my 10th grade year. So a lot of the students had been growing up and playing in bands together. I think that some of that was just because they just, I don't know, it was funny. By the time that all these kind of my peer group or these friends of mine that were a year or two older graduated from high school, it seemed like they were all on completely different instruments than what they had started with, even at the beginning of high school to a certain degree. And so they were really curious and learning a lot of different types of music, whether it was, somebody bringing in like, Herbie Hancock's Empyrean Isles and just putting that on the stereo before jazz band, which we had at like 7 a.m. So everybody was there just really bleary eyed, but, having this ridiculous, Freddie Hubbard, Tony Williams interaction coming at us in the morning. It's like, oh man, this is, actually like, waking me up. Music like that to bringing in, like Frank Zappa or Rush or like Bill Withers or people that were coming from a lot of different backgrounds. And I think that got me really inspired to want to get into what they were doing, because also like after school, they'd all hang around and just like jam with each other. Or a lot of times, there were 2 or 3 guys who would bring in like arrangements or say like, okay, we have this, there's like a battle of the bands coming up, or there's like a coffee house after school and we want to put together a group to play 2 or 3 songs. And so somebody would take the initiative to either, write out some charts, or just say, okay, everybody, we're going to, put on this recording and learn to play along with it and copy it. And then, we're going to play it on our own. And so that was really empowering to have, peers or people who were a couple years older than me doing that and be able to, jump in there. And, I still am, mostly just a drum set player. But like that got me thinking like, okay, I like this kind of music too. I'm going to sit down and try and figure out like, how can I, write a song? And it was just, yeah, like what Nick was saying, just seeing like, oh, one of my friends did this, I want to try this too. And so even though I didn't really have any sort of theoretical background, like I'd played piano for a while, so I knew notation, and played mallet instruments, of course, because that's a big part of that whole scene. But yeah, I remember just writing, just sitting down at the piano at home and plugging through different melody and a bass line and putting it together and bringing it in. And I'm sure that the other players, especially in comparison to some of the other arrangements, are seeing my stuff and like, okay, well, this is pretty pretty amateurish. But we all were there to support each other and bring in different tunes, and so that was a really cool experience. But yeah, I think that also along the same thing that Nick was saying, as far as getting into like a more formal learning environment, like in college, where, yeah, like I guess some of the expectation is that you have all this theory background and there's this terminology being thrown at you right away. It's like I was completely unprepared for that, and struggled for quite a while trying to like decipher what that was, because I didn't have the experience of in my ears of learning songs that way, and none of those classes were really about like, okay, go and play this, or we're gonna learn what this sounds like in class together. It's like, okay, I felt like I really missed the boat to some degree, and so I think that like a lot of the relief that I'm feeling with like putting together these workshops with you guys and this type of lesson planning and what's turned into the Jazz Fundamentals course is that like I feel like individually this is something that I would have benefited from, whether I was 15 years old up until now, like going through, especially as we get into these more complicated songs that we're learning. Like we have blues with 3 chord changes, or it's like embellishing it with 2 5s, stuff like the terminology, even that much I would have glazed over, in my graduate levels of college. Like, okay, I've heard people talk about this, but I don't really have any sort of sequence to build me up to understanding what that sounds like. But now, like, I think that this course, it's kind of bridges a lot of that, to get to the point where you can play what is really more difficult, jazz repertoire, stuff like blues, rhythm changes, stuff that involves different sectional forms like that. But because we start off like, okay, can we learn this simple 1 chord tune, Liza Jane, by ear, and have everybody jump right in and improvise using more of a sequence that's similar to like the way that we learn how to speak a language. It's that whole idea of, like I have young kids, and so it's interesting seeing at different stages of their development. First off, babies, they really can't do anything. It's sort of like they just react to their situation. They cry, they're hungry, they need to be changed, and it's just like I feel like that was sort of my jazz mindset for a long time. It's like, I don't know what's going on. It's like I feel terrible. So to go from that to like you're around your parents' vocabulary or them talking to you in a simple sort of way. It's like those single syllable words, or getting up to like mama, dada, like hi, things like that, and you start kind of babbling, trying to make those sounds, and that's where we get like the the goo goo gaga, just making sound like that. But eventually we're copying people. It's like we're they're saying mama, we're saying mama, we're able to imitate that sound. And then from there, we grow into adding this sort of context of like having, mama goes to the store, or, mama at the store. It's like we don't necessarily have ways to connect it and add like, the order of the words, the syntax at that point. But like that comes, and it's, we're able to get a little bit more conversational. And I think that's really parallel to the way that we've set up this course as a sequence. In learning, jazz and improvisation and style as a language, and so that we're trying not to take for granted the fact that even professionals or intermediate jazz lovers or learners maybe haven't learned a tune by ear, ever, or since they were like in elementary general music, doing Wheels on the Bus or something like that. And I think that without being overly simplistic, like we're still doing real songs and really improvising. I think that this course has made a pretty cool progression, so that these beginners, somebody who is like us when we were at 12, 13, 14, 15, has some functionality on their instrument, has listened to jazz a little bit, but like they can dive right in, learn songs, improvise, pick up the style, and have kind of a feedback loop. Because I think that's another thing I think that is neat about the way we structure this course, is there are these check-in points where you can play along with us, being the background band, and start off like, okay, you've learned the melody, now play the melody along with the band on your own. Record that, listen back to yourself. Like, does it sound like when Nick was playing it on trombone? And so sort of posing these critical questions at the beginning learners, no matter if they're 12 or 35, I think that it's pretty approachable. And then like you can get through the first module of learning Liza Jane in like an hour and have something that you can then go say, okay, I'm gonna call up or text my friend and say, hey, let's get together. We're gonna learn this song together. Let's play it together. And so it's something that then becomes a vehicle for interacting with other people, or if you have questions about the way that you're working your improvisation, we have that option utilizing our jazz coaching service, where you can send a videotape of yourself going through playing Liza Jane or our blues or our 2/5 tune, and send it to me or Chris or Nick, and we'll respond back, like video ourselves sort of in this sort of fashion we're doing this webinar, and give commentary, and hopefully this you get the idea that we're all really personable, fun guys, and it's not going to be really biting criticism of like, oh well, you can't do this anymore, you've missed the boat, you just need to stop improvising. It's like we're providing fun, fear-free feedback on what they're doing, and then hopefully it's something that people are able to take out into their neighborhood, take it back to their school, learn with friends. I think that all of these tunes are really approachable in that way. So I guess that's some of the spiel. But Nick and Chris, maybe because, I don't know, in developing a lot of the material for this course, because of my different experience coming at it as more of a drummer and kind of hobbyist, piano player, vocalist, working on improvisation from a different direction than you guys, maybe as being a pianist, being a trombonist, who you're in that kind of melodic harmonic mode of learning songs all the time, performing them. What would you say are some differences and maybe advantages to the way that we put together this course, that you think that beginning improvisers or students would benefit from in a way that might be different from other materials that's out there?
Well,
I think.
Go ahead.
I think that our course, the way that it's structured, it helps students. I think sometimes we get caught up like thinking of this giant, like it's too elementary to teach these little tunes by ear or something. But when you have a sequence like we've got here, it kind of gets through a lot of material in a really pretty quick amount of time. And I think that sometimes, like for example, the method books that some of my students use, they really don't progress in a way that allows the student to be challenged at each step. It's like the same couple of things like over and over and over for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, and you don't get a chance to really delve deeper into the concepts that you introduce. And I think the way that we have it structured, where everything is by ear, we're learning one thing, and then that directly relates and builds onto the next and builds onto the next and builds onto the next. I think for me, with my students, having a sequence like this is always helpful, and kind of having an overview of this whole range of stuff that we're going to get through, and not just like, okay, I need to teach you this blues because we have a concert tomorrow, and we're just kind of looking too short-sighted, thinking about it in a sequential way where we can get through a whole bunch of stuff that's going to let us improvise over a lot of different kinds of tunes in a short amount of time. And I think this course kind of really gives us the opportunity to delve into that range of stuff without challenging the students too much and making it impossible, but also without making them like learn 75 scales and arpeggiate all these things and arpeggiate these crazy diminished chords and this and stuff that's all way above their head and they don't need to know. So I think it's right, it's approachable. There's certain people, musicians that I know that are great musicians but have no experience with improvising, and they have no interest in like learning theory. Like it just doesn't interest them to like learn about all these kinds of scales and stuff. And I think that for me, when we were putting it together, I was thinking of those people and like, okay, how can I make that type of person interested in this? How can we introduce it easily to them? And so I think that that's the strength of the course for us.
And if I wanted to add on to that, one of the things that I would always mention in some of the improvisation modules that I conducted is the fact that when you're improvising, one of the most important things that you're dealing with is rhythm. I think rhythm has to come first. And when you're dealing with a method book, how are you going to have any sense of playing in a correct style or really with the correct rhythm unless you're reading from the page, and that's only kind of half the battle. I mean, sure, some of these method books come with play-alongs too, but I think one of the really neat things about our course is that there's this element of time. You get to play in real time with us. The imitation factor as well, repeating the same thing back or or saying something completely different, I think all too often a lot of beginning improvisers are taught with obviously what the correct notes are, use this scale, this theory and stuff, but the thing that's always lacking in my experience, I would say probably 95% of the students that I've picked up and begun to work with have been completely deficient in their rhythmic vocabulary, and that's really the thing that makes this music what it is. Learning how to play jazz. Jazz is a rhythmic language. So I think the fact that we're addressing all these tunes from, like I said, a real-time aspect where you can work on rhythm from the very get-go is a real benefit for the students. So
yeah, I agree, and that point that you brought up about being able to do it in real time is definitely different than if you had a play along or you stop and start. And I think that was something fun about the way that this, just like the course functions, is that we can break these lessons down into smaller chunks, or even like the way that a lot of this is set up is that we'll give kind of a little bit of a talk and demonstration of what the students are going to do. It's sort of like we present, like it's this idea of whole part whole. Like we say like, okay, here's the song you're going to learn, and we break it down into those smaller parts. But then, especially in terms of the improvisation, we get into this whole idea, or this partial idea. I'm mixing my. So we get into this idea of using smaller chunks, presenting the material, and then okay, so it goes to the next video. But then that's sort of a play along, where they can do it as many times as they like. It's set up so that, like, Chris or Nick or I, if it's an improvisational idea, we might play or say something, and then there's like the actual space there where they interact. And so the same way that we do this in our live workshops, like if we're working with a group of 60 students, that's how we teach it. And so we're not turning it into this artificial, like, okay, we have to stop the play along, go back to a certain point, and then ignore that the melody's there or ignore that the solo's there. It's like it's actually in more of a live context. And I think that's something that has been fun for me as a learner to go through, that really ties into the way that we actually teach this stuff that's been successful, and having the format. So then, it might just be a 30-second clip where we count ourselves in and say like, ba, ba, da, ba, da, da. They respond, ba, da, 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 da. We do something different, but like there's the backing track that's going along the whole time. And when they get done with that, they can do it again if they're not comfortable, or they can move along and get into something that's, adds more material, doing the responding with different ideas. yeah, I think that it's just a neat format, and it's fun, for me to dig into it and learn songs and the improvisation in this way. It seems really organic. Because I guess the other thing, thinking about like learning materials from books, it kind of goes back to the idea of like that's probably not the way that the author learned the material or came up with it. It's more, kind of going back to that sequence we're talking about, learning a language, like writing something down or learning to read. Those are kind of like the last steps. Like we don't start off by learning English. We're born and then somebody sticks a dictionary in front of us. It's like, okay, well, read this if you want to talk. And I think that we forget about like there are certain universal ways that we learn that apply to music or certain ways of visual arts or dance or stuff like that really has to build up in a sequence in order for it to be meaningful. And so a lot of these books are coming as a result of like, okay, I'm a great professional performer. This is something I can do, and I can play, live with people and present in that back and forth way that we all do in workshops or lessons. But when it comes down to communicating it to a broader audience, like, oh well, I'll just write it down and then this is what it looks like. Maybe there's a play along so they can hear what I sound like, but it's a sort of a convenient way of packaging what's in their heads or what they can do. So it's not necessarily the most conducive to learning the material, but I think that, I don't know, ours is the best. So that's what we're trying to say. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, like if you guys think about the way, like even now, like how do you build your improvisational vocabulary, or if you're on a gig or like, and you guys are playing all the time and learning new stuff all the time, like how much of that is done in the moment on a gig or something like that versus reading material, or like how do you still as professionals absorb new songs and vocabulary? Like what do you think is the most effective for you now as professionals?
Well, for me, I think zero of it is reading. I can't remember the last time that I built my improvisational vocabulary from looking at something. So whether it happened in time on a gig, or a lot of times it would be from analytical deep listening from X album or X track, it's all listening based for me. And I think the same thing goes from learning tunes. I've absorbed actually a lot of tunes that I can now play without ever having looked at a chart for them. In some cases without ever actually having like sat down to try to specifically learn them by myself, because I've just played the changes behind these tunes over and over and over again, to the point where, okay, well now I actually know what the melody is because I've just played this tune on the gig a million times. So it's 100% ear-based for me at this point, no matter if it's improvisational, learning a tune, or yeah, I think that answered the question, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with Chris. I mean, on a gig, so if it's somebody's music, it usually involves reading, but
Well, that's true.
otherwise, for example, I have a New Year's Eve gig tomorrow night, and this guy sent about 30 tunes, and about half of them, I was like, oh, I only sort of know that, and there's no way for me, and I point this out to my students all the time, so I'm trying to take my own advice here, and I always say, like, why look at the music to learn this thing when, one, it's probably not correct because you have no idea who transcribed it and wrote it down in this real book. And then number two, you're adding this intermediary step where you're reading it from the page, and then you're trying to memorize it, and then you know it. But if you just go and listen to the song, and you just learn it from the song, you've cut out that intermediary step, and it's, for me at least, it's way, way, way faster. And so when I have a lot of tunes to learn, it's just like I just got to listen to them, and kind of just learn to play along with the recording. Because for me, it's a time thing. I mean, it took a long time till I could actually listen to a recording and learn it, but it's like the more you do it, the faster it gets. The more you do it, the easier it gets. And so for my students, like when I'm teaching, if they bring a real book into the lesson, I close it and throw it away. And I'm like, no, we're not going to use this because it's just a crutch. And it's like, if you need to learn this song, let's find the recording, let's check it out, let's listen, just learn the melody, and then we'll learn the baseline melody and all those different things that we do in our sequence. We just kind of do it in a lesson, whether it's Giant Steps or it's Liza Jane, it's the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And yeah, that idea, yeah, that brings to mind, you know, I think that we've all worked a little bit with the great bassist and composer arranger John Clayton. Like, he always brings up, you know, he'll come into combo workshops at colleges, and you know, if he sees the real book, you know, he brings it's like, yeah, you know, throw your real book away. It's like, I think it's just a big crutch. And it takes, you know, people like that who've been around for a while to remind us, like, you know, this sheet, this isn't music. You know, like, what's in your head and what you're listening to, that's music. Like, if we think that we're going to learn a song or how to play with a style by, you know, staring, you know, at a piece of paper without any sort of musical, you know, aural context, like, we're just really missing so many of those steps in just how we learn, period, let alone music. So yeah, I think that's a really great point. And yeah, it does, you know, maybe take a little bit more time to build up the skills to do that at first. But I think that even if you're, you know, a classroom teacher and you want to be working on jazz or any sort of music, having a component where you're learning material by ear, just because it uses a completely different part of your brain, and it's so much more about, like, okay, can you repeat this small amount of material? And I think that's also part of it, is making it bite-sized enough so that it's not the difference between, okay, we're reading a 32 bar tune to now we're learning an entire 32 bar tune by ear. We got to say, okay, well, there's so many patterns. You know, it's broken up into 4 8-bar sections, and each of those 8-bar sections, you know, there's a bass line and there's a melody and there's guide tone lines and harmony that go through that. And so many of these tunes are like other songs. And so if we break it down, it's that idea of like whole part whole again. We start to recognize there's so many patterns, so many tunes that are like other songs, so many sections of songs, you know, chord progressions or little melodic ideas that, you know, we've absorbed just through, you know, being, you know, musical listeners and learning and absorbing sound throughout our lives. And if we recognize and identify those things, then, you know, our brain processes it so much more quickly. And I think that, yeah, going through this sequence like Nick is talking about, where, you know, you hear the song, we play, you know, Liza Jane or Second Line or, you know, any of these tunes, and then, you know, we break it down. We learn the bass line, we learn the melody, we learn the guide tones, and then we get into improvisational ideas. But those improvisational ideas are still based off of the song. It's like, that's another, you know, Chris talks about, you know, the importance of rhythm and having clarity with that, you know, drawing melodic material from the actual song itself. And, you know, we bring in example solos. I think that's another thing that we've alluded to a little bit, talking about transcribing. You know, Chris and Nick have example solos on all of these songs. There's sort of a simpler one and a more advanced one, because it's very important to be getting, you know, all types of vocabulary in your ears. But then we take those solos and, like, I actually sit down at the piano and break down a certain section of it and talk about, like, okay, this is a great example of, you know, different types of articulation in the style, so that, you know, as a learner, you can focus on 1 or 2 different things and, you know, learn a piece of the solo. And so that gives you a jumping off point for your own improvisation, or to recognize, like, oh, he's using the melody to start off his solo in this song. Oh, in this other song, here's the melody in a different way. These are all just sort of common ways that, you know, we can all improvise, so that it takes away that fear. It removes a lot of that mystical nature that I think, you know, we were talking about at the beginning, that sort of, you know, deer in the headlights, having somebody who's really great just play something amazing and fast, but it's just like all over your head. And the only thing, it's like, okay, well, that's great. And now I'm gonna, you know, go play video games, because that's something I can do. But I think that this process and this course kind of breaks it down into a way that, not only is it fun, and hopefully as fun as video games and things like that, but it's something that really anybody can do, whether you're a beginner in 6th grade or you played trumpet 20 years ago and you're looking for something to do, and this gives you a jumping off point to learn songs and like real jazz songs and improvise, and it's fun. I think that's the main thing it comes back to. Jazz and learning songs should be fun and interactive.
Totally.
So I don't know, any closing thoughts that you guys have on I don't know why this is like the big sales part of the pitch, why you would recommend people try out this course and invest in it as a sequence, to improving their ability to play jazz.
Well, for me, number one would be that I wish that somebody had told me any of this kind of sequence. I didn't know that you would learn something in this way until I was in college. And what a waste of time to me that was. I had so many years where I could have been learning so much more if I had taken the time to invest a little bit now for the future. Because it took me probably an additional 5 years to get like the oral skills together, like hearing skills together, to be able to listen to something, play it back. Like all of that took me a long time because I just avoided it and and used my real book as a crutch and learned the tunes from the I'm not going to use the name of the thing, but the play-alongs, and just play along over and over and over and never really get anywhere. And so to me, that's the big pitch. This is getting yourself ahead of the curve. You're setting yourself up to, learn skills that are going to allow you to be successful playing any kind of music, from once you get through the course all the way to when you decide to stop playing music, if that ever happens. And, for me, that's the big, huge saver of time. Even if you think, and if you can read everything, that's great. You have great facility already that's going to allow you to get through the course really fast and realize how simple it all really is.
Yeah, absolutely. I wish I could have those years back myself with this exact kind of tool, because as Nick said, those are 5 years that are just gone of wasted time. And now at this point, especially in my life as a performer and an educator, it's all about how do you make the most efficient use of your time to learn things to the best of your ability. And this course, I think, really delivers the most comprehensive, well-rounded approach to this kind of material. And the cool thing is, it's never too late to start. I mean, I have a student right now who's middle-aged, somewhere between 40 and 50. He's a clinical psychiatrist. And I've been working with him using exactly the same kind of sequence that we've been doing by ear. And I've been working with him for 2 years. And he had some basic classical training, and now it's like he's playing some great tunes. He's enrolled in other ensemble courses around the city. And it's just really cool to see how he's got a well-rounded start to things. So I think that this course would be really great for not only the new, like the young beginner, but also any adults who are looking to get into this as well. It's never too late.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that, this is a sequence that, we learn from ourselves. It's stuff that we've been doing with the IfCM and these workshops all over the country for the last 5 years. And, in our own, like I was teaching a very beginner jazz combo this last semester, when we went through and we learned 3 of these. I guess that we did, 4 tunes, a couple of them that aren't in this course, but songs that we've done with the IfCM. We basically really only had like five rehearsals to learn these 4 tunes, did it completely by ear. All of the students soloed on every song and did different things with style and arrangement. And I mean, it's just kind of amazing that once you kind of buy in as a teacher to the ability of this, like you can sell your music stands or use that for a different occasion. It's like these kids were playing jazz by ear with, these are like 11, 12-year-old kids up until 15, 16-year-olds who really didn't have any experience playing or listening to jazz. And I think that it just sort of speaks to the ability of the method for learning it, like getting it in your ears first. And it can be a way that you can learn an entire program of music and get people improvising, because I think that's also one of the things that can seem easier in being an ensemble director putting together a jazz band, is like, okay, well, there's these charts and we can read them in the same way that we might read our concert band or our orchestra piece. But you're really missing out on like what makes jazz, and that's the sound, it's the rhythm, it's the style. And I think that if as lovers of jazz and performers and propagators of that great part of our history, we really have to pay tribute to the way that it sounds and teach the material in the way that everybody knows what it sounds like. And that might mean a little bit more upfront time from us as teachers or directors, but I think honestly it's pretty comparable. It's like if we can go through and work through this course with our students, we're absorbing the material at the same time. I think that it's just logically it's laid out really well and focusing on the sound of jazz, and then further on down the road, then all of that writing it out and reading it is going to make so much more sense, because in the same way that we learn a language, reading a book makes sense because we know what the context of those words put together. We can use our imagination to put that together, and we know what it sounds like before it happens. So,
Totally.
Yeah. Well, gentlemen, thank you for joining us all on this exciting question and answer. Although mostly we're posing a lot of questions that we've gathered from other sources, from teachers and students, and our own experience. So I thank you both for joining us all. And yeah, any parting words?
Have fun.
That's right.
Yeah, enjoy the course.
Definitely. Cool. And so in the link to this video, we'll have all of the information about how you can sign up for the course. It's Creative Jazz Fundamentals, a course for beginning improvisers. And the links will just be here, and we'll have a little card up on the screen. So you can go through and you can try the first module completely for free by going in and enrolling. Learn this great one-chord New Orleans standard, Little Liza Jane. Go through, learn all of the parts, bass line, melody, call and response, and improvise. It takes about an hour to get through the whole thing. And from there, you get into learning two-chord song, this piece that Nick wrote, What Rhymes with Missoula, two different types of blues, three-chord blues, and more of a jazz blues. And then we get into kind of these 32-bar sectional tunes that incorporate 2-5-1 progressions, and then Chris wrote a great modal tune. So we get a pretty good overview of different types of jazz songs you would encounter in the real world, but it's put together in a way that, because you've learned the easier or the lesser amount of material first, adding a little bit or getting a little bit more complicated with the improvisation, it all makes sense because it's sequential. So we really hope that you try this out. Feel free to contact us at any point at info@ifcmusic.org, and we will get back to you. There's opportunities for video feedback through our jazz coaching service. And yeah, like Nick said, just have fun, learn to play jazz, and we hope to catch you soon.